Have you ever walked into a place you built with your own hands only to be treated like a stranger? Have you ever been denied entry to a space you opened up for hundreds of others just because of your skin color or your simple appearance? Today's story isn't about an argument. It's not a viral video of outrage. It's about a moment quiet, simple, but powerful enough to shake an entire office culture. You're about to meet Andre Parker, a black man and the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. But one ordinary morning, as he walked into the building he founded, a new security guard stopped him. No one recognized him. No one confirmed he was the boss. And what hurt the most was the silence from everyone around. But you know what's strange? Andre didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He didn't record a video to expose anyone. Instead, he did something that left the entire company in stunned silence. And then reflection. It was a Tuesday. The sky was overcast. As usual, Andre walked from the secondary parking lot into the main building. No fancy suit, no escort. Just a dark sweater, plain trousers, and a light smile as he greeted the receptionist. But the receptionist was new that day. So was the security guard. "Who are you here to see?" the voice asked, polite but full of suspicion. Andre paused. He pointed toward the elevator. "I'm heading up to my office." The guard shook his head. "Sorry, sir. You don't have a key card. You need to register first. This is a restricted area." A few employees walked by. Some noticed, some avoided eye contact. No one said a word. And in that moment, Andre realized with them he was just a strange black man walking into a space that didn't look like it belonged to him. But what happened next? Not a shouting match. Not a call demanding someone be fired, but a lesson delivered without words yet powerful enough to change the way everyone in that company saw each other from that day forward. Let me take you through this story. Not just to witness a CEO being stopped at the door, but to understand why in today's world so many people are still excluded from their own dreams, just because of how they look. And more importantly, to see how one man chose to respond with dignity instead of rage. Shall we begin? Andre Parker wasn't a stranger to that building. He was the one who signed off on the first architectural drawings of the company's headquarters. He stayed up for 3 nights to ensure every workspace was balanced for both engineers and HR staff. He personally greeted every new hire during onboarding sessions, even though he was the CEO. To Andre, that building wasn't just an office, it was a labor of love, a dream he and his team built from nothing. And yet on one ordinary morning, as he stepped into the grand lobby, no one recognized him. No one. Andre wore a gray sweater and carried his laptop in a leather bag. No ID badge, no name tag. Just a simple appearance and brown skin. The security guard, newly hired just a week prior, walked over. "Who are you here to see?" he asked, his tone respectful, but his eyes wary. "I work here," Andre replied. "Which department? Can someone confirm you?" the guard asked. Andre pointed to the elevator. "I'm the founder of this company." There was a brief pause. Then came a shake of the head and a request to fill out the visitor form. And in that moment, something quietly cracked. Not Andre's pride, but a bitter truth sometimes. How people see you matters more than who you really are. This isn't just Andre's story. It's also the story of Dr. Omar Johnson, an African-American surgeon who was once asked by hospital staff to leave the restricted area as he was preparing for surgery on his own patient. Or the story of Ursula Burns, the first black woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company, who was once asked if she was there to clean the office during her first board meeting. When bias creeps into the gaze, even the clearest reality can become blurred. A founder can be mistaken for a stranger, a leader mistaken for the help, and a successful person denied entry to the very space they built simply because their appearance doesn't fit someone's unspoken expectations. But here's a moment to pause and ask yourself, how many times in life have we failed to see someone not because they were invisible, but because we were looking through bias? A father in work clothes picking up his child. Do you assume he's the nanny? A woman of color speaking at a conference. Do you assume she's the assistant? These snap judgments, even unintentional, leave lasting scars. If you've ever witnessed this, or worse felt it, firsthand, share your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to read it and feel seen. And if Andre's story touched you, like this video and subscribe, because there are so many stories that need to be told so we can stop just looking at each other and start truly seeing. And then in that lobby, Andre didn't walk into the building with a staff badge. He didn't call an assistant to explain. Instead, he stood still, smiled, and made a phone call. But the most surprising part didn't come from the security guard. It came from the people who had worked with Andre for years. No one spoke up. No one confirmed his identity. Not a single nod, just silence. And that was the most painful part of the story. Not everyone dressed simply as a junior employee, and not everyone in power needs noise to be recognized. When people hear the word CEO, most picture tailored suits, luxury cars, glass towers, and a boardroom full of people bowing their heads to receive orders. But Andre Parker, the founder and CEO of one of the fastest growing tech companies on the East Coast, chose a very different image. He had no personal driver, no embossed leather briefcase, and instead of taking the building's penthouse office, he worked in the open floor area right beside his engineering team. New employees often took weeks to realize that the guy pouring them coffee each morning was the CEO. Andre believed that true power isn't about display, but about the ability to listen. Some of the greatest people don't need to stand on pedestals, they choose to stand on the same ground as everyone else. Born into a working-class family in South Detroit, Andre grew up surrounded by industrial smoke and rotting wooden houses. His mother was a night shift nurse, his father a mechanic. Neither went to college. But they taught Andre one lesson for life: never judge someone by the watch they wear, judge them by how they treat those with less power. He was a strong student but constantly had to prove he deserved to be there. While studying at MIT, Andre was once mistaken for a janitor in the lab. On another occasion, he was told to leave a classroom because the professor hasn't arrived yet, even though he was the guest speaker. Those experiences didn't make Andre bitter. On the contrary, they taught him to be quiet, humble, and sharp like a solid rock beneath a river of bias. In today's noisy world, humility is sometimes the loudest voice. Even though he held major shares and was named to Forbes's 40 Under 40, Andre often took the subway to work. He believed in flat culture. If you only listen to people on the top floor, you'll never know what's happening on the ground. That's what made employees love him, but also led to a painful irony. Because he was so approachable, many didn't realize he was the CEO. A former employee once said, "I thought Andre was the guy who fixed the printers. On my first day, I asked him to reset it. He did, then thanked me for giving him a chance to help." That story spread through the company like a charming tale, but beneath it was a deeper message. If you treat people kindly, they may not remember your title, but they will remember your humanity. You don't need to say who you are if your actions already do. Andre never had to introduce his role when walking into a meeting, and that's exactly why on that morning, no one assumed the man in the sweater without a badge was the founder. Not because they disliked him, but because they were used to a different image of leadership. They assumed the most powerful person would arrive surrounded by staff. They thought a CEO could never walk alone, and they were wrong. Andre stood there in the lobby of the company he had built, stopped, doubted. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he didn't fit the mold in someone else's mind. And at that moment, what disappointed him the most wasn't the suspicion of a stranger. It was the silence of the people he once called teammates. And now we return to that moment in the lobby where Andre was stopped in plain view of familiar faces. No one spoke up. No one said he's our CEO. In the next part, you'll see something colder than bias: the silence when truth needs to be said aloud. Stay tuned. This is where everything truly begins. Sometimes the gatekeeper doesn't choose how to treat you, they just reflect the bias society planted in them. If you asked the security guard that day at Andre's company, he'd probably say, "I was just doing my job." And he might honestly believe it. He was trained to make sure no unauthorized person enters the building. Every day he was reminded to stay alert, especially toward people without name tags, key cards, or a familiar look. The problem isn't with the protocol. The problem is in how we decide who looks like they belong. And in America, that still often aligns with race, age, and appearance, even if no one says it out loud. A no-entry sign doesn't always hang on a wall. Sometimes it hangs in the mind. Andre wasn't the only one who was stopped. Remember in 2018 in a luxury building in St. Louis when a white woman blocked a black man named Darian Toles from entering the elevator even though he lived there. She repeatedly asked him to prove he was a resident. Tolles recorded the interaction and the video went viral. She wasn't a guard, but she believed she had the right to gatekeep because he didn't look like someone who belonged. We call this racial gatekeeping when someone, whether intentionally or not, uses their small authority to exclude others from a space based on instinct and prejudice. And sadly, it's not rare, especially when the person being checked is black, whether they're doctors, lawyers, artists, or CEOs. We aren't born with bias, but if we're not conscious, we'll carry it on without realizing it. That security guard may not have meant harm. He didn't shout. He didn't insult. He just followed access policies. But the painful truth is, those policies, when paired with unconscious bias, can become invisible barriers that make people like Andre feel like outsiders in the very world they created. You could call it accidental. Andre calls it systemic unawareness. In modern companies, security staff are often the first to meet guest new hires and even top leadership. And how they react isn't just a personal matter. It's a mirror reflecting how an organization unconsciously defines who's who. That's why many major U.S. firms are now retraining security staff with bias awareness programs, teaching them to recognize unconscious prejudice. But that kind of change doesn't happen overnight. Gatekeeping isn't wrong. But when the door only opens for certain people, that very door becomes a barrier. So what's the lesson here? It's not about firing the security guard. It's not about posting the CEO's face on every wall in the building. It's about this: every organization must be brave enough to examine how it defines power and presence. If a CEO gets stopped just because he doesn't look like the people who usually walk in, then the problem isn't just at the door, it's in the culture that unconsciously built an exclusive image of leadership. And Andre, as he always does, didn't respond with anger. He observed, he took note, and he planned to address the root cause. But as you'll see, what hurt Andre even more didn't come from the security guard. It didn't come from the access policy. It came from the very people who once called him mentor, the people who sat in meetings with him, laughed with him, signed contracts with him, but chose silence. And that silence, at a moment when the truth needed to be acknowledged, spoke louder than any action. Let's continue into a chapter that is bitter but necessary. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't being misunderstood, but realizing that no one stood up to say they know who you are. Andre stood there in the main lobby of his company, a space that once symbolized the early days of his startup, a place where he and his co-founders had assembled chairs, stuck logos on the walls, and placed small plants to create a welcoming feel for new employees. That day, he was stopped by a security guard for not having an access badge, and strangely, many people walked past him. They recognized him. They knew exactly who he was. Some had been interviewed by him personally. Some had just been praised by him in last week's team meeting. But no one said a word. Not a single confirmation. Not one simple sentence. That's our CEO? They lowered their heads, walked quickly by, and chose silence. Silence in moments that demand courage is the clearest statement of irresponsibility. In psychology, this is known as the bystander effect. When many people witness an injustice, the likelihood of anyone helping actually goes down. Everyone assumes someone else will speak up, but in the end, no one does. In the workplace, this effect is even stronger because people fear getting involved. They fear being labeled overly sensitive, emotional, or troublesome. And most of all, they fear losing professional opportunities. In that moment, their career mattered more than the truth. Their status mattered more than a man's dignity. So they left Andre standing there, in a company he built with his own hands. A company not made of walls and desks, but of trust between people. This wasn't the first time a black leader had been silently abandoned. We can recall Ken Frazier, former CEO of Merck, one of the few black leaders of a Fortune 500 company. When he publicly opposed a divisive government policy, many of his industry peers stayed silent. No protest, no support, just a declaration of staying out of politics. But in society, staying out of truth is another way of enabling wrong. And in the workplace, a culture of avoidance is fertile ground where injustice grows in silence. People don't leave a company just because of salary. More often, they leave because they feel no one will stand up for them. So what's the takeaway? Not everyone needs to be a hero. But sometimes one simple sentence, like "I know this person," they deserve respect. can save an entire workplace culture. Because the things left unsaid are often the things the affected person never forgets. That silence lingers. It makes people question not just the organization, but the relationships they once trusted. A truly strong company isn't measured by its growth rate, but by how it responds when injustice happens in its own lobby. That day, Andre said nothing. No rebuke, no, why didn't anyone speak up? He just smiled and walked away. But the next morning, the entire company received an email from the main conference room. A company-wide meeting, no explanation, no dramatic subject line, just one sentence. Be there. 9 a.m. There's something I want us to think about. And in that room, Andre didn't speak loudly. He didn't criticize. He didn't name names. He just displayed one line on the screen, a short sentence, but it gripped every throat in the room because no one could say they didn't know. We're about to step into that moment where a CEO doesn't use his power to punish, but to awaken. A moment that was subtle, powerful, and unforgettable for everyone present. True strength doesn't always come from yelling. Sometimes it comes from a silence that makes the entire room listen. When Andre was stopped at the lobby of his own company, he had every reason to react. He could have raised his voice. He could have called HR right away. He could have fired the guard for ignorance and disrespect. But Andre didn't do any of that. Instead, he quietly pulled out his phone, made a brief call, then sat down on a bench near the entrance. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't annoyed. He didn't feel the need to declare his position. He was just a man waiting to be recognized in the world he built. Anger might have silenced people, but timely silence can make a whole team face themselves. That silence wasn't because Andre was weak. It was because he understood every action from a leader is a message. If he got angry, it would only reinforce the stereotype black men are too reactive. If he applied pressure, fear would replace respect. Andre chose a third option to make people reflect on themselves, and that is a leadership art few people master. Don't use your title to impose. Don't use emotions to manipulate. Use calmness to awaken awareness in others. You don't always need to speak up to be heard. Sometimes poise is what makes others feel the most ashamed. Do you remember what happened to Christian Cooper in 2020? Christian, a black birdwatcher, was walking through Central Park when he asked a woman to leash her dog as required. She responded by calling the police and falsely claiming she was being threatened by an African-American man. Christian didn't yell. He didn't touch her. He recorded the interaction. He remained silent, and he let the entire country witness it. That decision not to get angry didn't make him weak. On the contrary, it showed a model of confronting injustice with intelligence and dignity. Andre understood that, and in that moment he made a decision: I don't need to win in the lobby of my own company. I need to help them see that they've already lost without anyone needing to say it. Some people remain silent to protect their pride, but others remain silent to preserve their grace. The next morning, in the company's largest conference room, over 120 employees gathered. No one knew exactly why. There was no agenda, no subject line, just a black screen, and then a line of white text: if my skin color made me invisible in my own company, then we have a problem deeper than just one security guard. No one spoke. Some lowered their heads. Some had tears in their eyes. Andre stepped forward, not holding a mic, not sitting in a leader's chair. He just stood among them and looked around the room. Then he said 3 words, "That's all today," and walked out. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes, but its impact stayed with everyone who was there. A real leader doesn't have to fix everything, just raise the question no one can avoid. So what's the lesson? Silence, when it comes from composure and awareness, isn't avoidance. It's a form of speech more powerful than any accusation. Because truth doesn't need to be shouted to echo far. It just needs to be placed in the right moment with enough grace that no one can deny it. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to hold back, not because you were weak, but because you were above it, know this: you're not alone. And your composure may be teaching others a lesson that words never could. But Andre's story isn't just about him. It's a piece of something much bigger. About many people, from CEOs to doctors, from engineers to founders, who've been misjudged, excluded, underestimated, simply because they didn't look like they belonged. A true leader doesn't need to bang the table to quiet a room. They command attention by simply being present. The next morning at exactly 9 a.m., every employee at Andre's company showed up in the 10th floor conference room. No one knew the exact reason. All they saw was an email from Andre's personal account short with no title, no explanation. There's something I want us to think about. Meet at 9 a.m., main conference room. The room wasn't tense exactly, but no one was relaxed enough to make small talk either. Everyone could feel that yesterday had left a quiet void inside. No one said it, but everyone knew Andre had been stopped, and everyone had been silent. Then he walked into the room, no assistant by his side, no laptop or materials. Just Andre as always, but this time, something was different. Change doesn't always require a long speech, sometimes just one sentence at the right time from the right person. Andre stepped up in front of the screen. No mic, no podium. The screen behind him showed a single line. If my skin color made me invisible in my own company, then we have a problem deeper than just one security guard. One short sentence. No anger, no accusations, but like a giant mirror placed in the center of the group, forcing everyone to see themselves. The silence in that conference room was different from the silence the day before. It wasn't indifference. It was awareness rising. One young employee later shared, "At that moment, I wished I could go back and say, that's our CEO. But I didn't. And I think Andre knew that. But he didn't blame us." Leadership is not about punishing. Leadership is about reflecting what is right and creating space for others to do better. No one was reprimanded during that meeting. There were no breakdowns of fault. No one was called out. There was just one truth laid out, clearly, gently, but unavoidably. Andre didn't say much. After the line was displayed, he simply said, "I don't need anyone to defend me. I just hope that next time if this happens to someone else, anyone, you won't look away." Then he smiled, thanked everyone, and ended the meeting. That was it. And that simplicity left a deeper echo than any hour-long speech could have. A true leader doesn't need to tell people who they are. They make people remember not because of their title, but because of how they make others think differently. A week later, the HR department proposed an update to the company's unconscious bias training program. The security team began inviting experts to conduct retraining sessions. But the most important changes didn't come from workshops. They came from small, everyday actions in the company afterward. An employee took the initiative to introduce new interns to everyone. A front desk assistant made an effort to memorize the names of people even after just one meeting. A young black engineer was invited for the first time to present at a strategic meeting that had previously been reserved for the old guard. Those things didn't happen on their own. They were the ripple effect of one quiet act of leadership with far-reaching power. Big change often begins with small courage, and the most powerful kind is when you don't accuse, but still make people change. You don't always have to use authority to be heard. Sometimes you just need to stand tall, say the right thing, and let the rest unfold as a natural awakening. If you've ever experienced a moment where you didn't need to prove anything yet, the entire room suddenly realized who you were, that's one of the clearest signs of true leadership. And if you haven't yet felt that moment, believe this: when you hold on to your dignity, you're not just leading with words, but with presence. But Andre wasn't the only one ever rendered invisible in the very space he helped build. His story is just one piece of a much larger picture where thousands of other black professionals have also been seen as out of place because of their appearance, their voice, or their background. And in the next part, we'll go beyond the walls of Andre's company to other stories from other people, but all with one common thread. They had to fight to be seen, not because they lacked talent, but because society wasn't used to seeing them in positions of power. A true leader doesn't have to tap the table to silence a room. They make people listen simply by showing up. Andre didn't say much. No corrective action plans, no long open letters, no accusatory emails following that incident. But through the way he chose to respond, he gave the company some of the most valuable leadership lessons it would ever receive. And the most remarkable part, none of those lessons were written on a PowerPoint slide. Leadership isn't telling others what to do. It's living in a way that makes others want to do what's right. The first thing Andre taught was composure is a form of strength. In an age where anything can be recorded, edited, and instantly shared, remaining calm in the face of misunderstanding or disrespect is not easy. But Andre showed everyone I can stay in control even when I'm denied entry to the very building I created. And that made everyone reflect: if the highest leader chose not to get angry, then who else could justify losing their temper over less? A well-built company doesn't just have sound strategies. It has a leader who inspires people to become better than they were yesterday. The second lesson Andre left behind was about company culture. After the meeting the following day, no new policy was immediately announced. There was no need, because Andre's action, quiet yet timely, redefined the standard of behavior within the company. People started greeting each other more. They introduced themselves voluntarily. They shared information about new hires, not because of a rule, but because they didn't want to be the person who turned away again. Andre reminded the entire company that culture doesn't live in the handbook. It lives in the behaviors that get repeated every day. True leaders don't just change policies, they change the way people see one another. The third lesson: respect doesn't come from status, it comes from how you make others feel. Andre didn't ask to be treated properly. He didn't demand that anyone call him Mr. CEO. What he needed and what he awakened in others was self-reflection. A mid-level manager shared after the meeting, "Andre didn't just make me realize I was wrong, he made me want to be better." And perhaps that's the highest form of leadership: not forcing, not controlling, but inspiring people through authenticity and consistency. A good leader makes you obey. A great leader makes you change even when no one tells you to. You know what's remarkable? Andre never posted this story online. There was no emotional status update, no viral hashtag. Everything you're hearing now was told by a former employee, someone who quit the company a few months later, but still said, "I've never seen anyone teach the value of humanity without giving a single lecture like Andre did." Leadership isn't a title, it's presence. It's how you act when all eyes are on you, and also when no one's watching. It's how you respond to injustice, not letting it make you bitter, but letting it make you wiser. If you're in a leadership position, whether it's a small team or a senior role, remember this: people don't learn from what you say, they learn from how you live. But Andre is just one story. How many others, also CEOs of their own lives, have been stopped, misjudged, pushed aside, in spaces where they fully belonged? In the next section, we'll step outside Andre's office walls to explore stories from other individuals in other industries. Because this isn't just a one-time incident, it's a recurring pattern, and it's time we called it what it really is. When the same story keeps repeating across places, across people, it's no longer an accident, it's a system. Andre's story shook many people, but the deeper truth is, it wasn't a rare incident. Andre wasn't alone. He was just one of thousands of Black individuals in America who have been misjudged, misunderstood, or worse, excluded from spaces where they fully deserve to be. Not because they lacked ability, not because they were in the wrong place, but simply because they didn't look like what society is used to associating with power. When your presence surprises people, the problem isn't you. The problem is the image in their minds. Remember the story of Ursula Burns, the first Black woman to become CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Xerox. In her first meeting with a partner company, she walked in and was mistaken for a secretary. A man directly asked her, "Can you get me some coffee before the CEO arrives?" She didn't get angry. She smiled and replied, "I'll get your coffee and then we'll start the meeting, because I'm the CEO." No rebuke, no long explanations, but enough to make that man feel ashamed and remember it forever. A system doesn't need signs to segregate. It just needs a few well-timed looks of doubt to make people feel like they don't belong. At major events, executive conferences, or even luxury building elevators, successful Black professionals are often met with, "What department are you from? Who did you come here with? Are you sure you're in the right place?" And the hardest part is those questions are usually polite. No yelling, no insults. But behind that politeness is a quiet implication. You don't look like someone who should be here. The most insidious form of bias isn't in actions. It's in the assumptions people make about you. A Black software engineer named James once shared that every time he entered a partner company's office, the security guard always asked for his invitation email, while his white colleagues in dress shirts were simply waved through. He never complained. He never made a scene. But one day he wrote a single sentence on LinkedIn. Every morning I carry my ID, my laptop, and an invisible shield to protect myself from bias. Some people have to carry their achievements just to prove they belong. And that's the heartbreaking core of these stereotypes. They force people to prove themselves while others are automatically assumed to belong. They make people like Andre Ursula or James take on an extra job outside their actual roles to reassure others that their presence is legitimate. No one should have to do that, because presence doesn't need to be justified, it just needs to be respected. If you've ever been surprised to see a black person in a leadership position, giving a keynote speech or leading a team, pause and ask yourself, why am I surprised? Maybe the issue isn't that they're in the wrong place. Maybe it's that your internal image of who belongs in that role was built wrong from the start. Realizing that isn't an insult. It's the first step toward becoming kinder, wiser, and more aware. And here we're not just talking about Andre or Ursula or James. We're talking about a generation of people, often quietly, who have overcome barriers that are invisible, unnamed, but deeply real. And in the next part, you'll meet questions that yes, you might already be carrying deep down. Because in the end, this story isn't only about those being judged. It's also about us, the ones who can choose to speak up or look away. Let's keep going. This is where we start looking inward. When everyone claps and calls your name, it's easy. But when no one knows who you are, how will you choose to act? That question, so simple, might be one of the hardest tests in life. Because in today's world, business cards, job titles, social media followers often act like passports for respect. But when you lose all of that, can you still hold on to yourself? Andre Parker's story begins right there. In a moment where he, as CEO of a major company, was stopped like a stranger, no name tag, no team by his side, no VIP badge. And in that moment when no one validated who he was, he chose to act in a way that everyone would remember. Who you are when no one's watching, that's your truest self. Here's the strange thing. When we're not recognized, we often act differently. Some people become defensive. Some get angry. Some withdraw, quietly walking away. But true leaders like Andre choose to act with grace even when no one sees. And that's not noble for applause. It's a character shaped by years of living through these moments. A character that exists without needing an audience. Respect isn't a reward you give to the deserving. It's a habit no matter who you're facing. You may have heard the story of former U.S. President Barack Obama when he was still in office visiting a military base. In the cafeteria, a young soldier didn't recognize him and simply said, "Grab your food from that line, buddy." Obama nodded, thanked him, and walked like any other guest. Later, when the soldier realized he had just ordered the president around, he panicked and apologized. Obama just smiled. "I used to be the new guy too." I get it. No ego. No scolding. Because he understood true power isn't about being recognized. It's about holding your character, especially when you're not. If one day you find yourself standing in a crowd where no one applauds, will you still keep your composure, your kindness, and your confidence? Andre's story doesn't end with applause. There was no viral video with millions of views, no TED Talk, just a company that changed from the inside out, changed in how they saw others, changed in how they acted toward those who didn't match expectations. And if you've made it this far, maybe something inside you stirred too. Maybe it was a memory of a time you were dismissed. Maybe it was a moment when you realized you had stayed silent in the face of injustice. Or maybe it was a quiet reminder that from today on, you'll treat everyone as if they matter even before they prove it. Who are you when no one sees you? The answer isn't on your resume. It's not on your LinkedIn profile. It's in the way you choose to hold dignity, compassion, and composure even when there's no one to witness it. Because sometimes the person who most needs to see it is you. Andre's story is a mirror, not for admiration, but for each of us to ask ourselves, if I were treated unfairly one day, could I still preserve my dignity like that? And if I saw someone else being mistreated, would I speak up or turn away? If this story made you pause and reflect, leave a comment. I will not stay silent. Just one sentence. But it could be your promise to yourself and the spark that gives someone else the courage to speak up. Share this video with a friend, a colleague, or someone who's ever felt unseen, because this might be exactly what they need today. And if you've experienced something similar, don't carry it alone. Share your story in the comments. We read and treasure every real story from you. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the stories that touch the heart stories of justice, dignity, and quiet people who are changing the world through the way they live.